The war had taken its toll on humanity. For years, the human alliance had fought to survive against the overwhelming forces of the Zaran Empire, a galaxy-spanning conflict that had cost countless lives and altered the course of history. Among the countless soldiers who fought on the front lines, one name had become legendary: Captain Damon Riker. He was known for his unshakable courage, his strategic brilliance, and his unmatched combat skills. To the universe, he was a hero. However, Riker's true identity was a secret known to only a select few. Beneath the powerful exosuit of his combat armor, he wasn't just a soldier. He was once a diplomat, a man who believed in peace, who sought to bring order to the chaos of the galaxy through negotiation, not warfare. His life had been devoted to finding common ground, building bridges, and fostering understanding between different races. But that was before the war turned him into something he never imagined. The armor that Riker wore was more than just protection. It was a mask. It concealed not only his physical form, but his humanity as well. The man who once sat across from world leaders, advocating for peace, was now a soldier in the trenches, his hands stained with blood. And as the years went on, the lines between who he had been and who he had become began to blur. The mission he had been assigned to this time was crucial. The Zaran Empire's capital planet, Zaran 7, was on the verge of falling into chaos. Rebel factions had risen, and the Princess of the Empire, Princess Alia Zaran, was being held captive by those who sought to overthrow the Empire's rule. The human alliance had learned that if they could take the princess, they could destabilize the entire empire and end the war in humanity's favor. Riker had been chosen for the mission not only because of his combat prowess, but because of his knowledge of diplomacy. The alliance hoped that, once the princess was rescued, Riker would be able to negotiate with her, using his knowledge of peace to sway her toward a more peaceful solution, one that would end the bloodshed and bring the Zaran Empire to the table for a truce. His plan was straightforward: infiltrate the rebel stronghold, rescue the princess, and bring her to safety. All he had to do was ensure that the princess never learned the truth about who he was, about the man beneath the armor. The weight of his secrets was a burden he carried every day, and he wasn't sure how much longer he could keep up the charade. But for now, his mission was clear. As he landed on the outskirts of Zaran 7, the planet's towering spires loomed in the distance. The city was bustling with activity. Despite the civil unrest, rebels roamed the streets, their presence like a shadow over the Empire's capital. Riker had been briefed on the location of the princess's prison, a heavily guarded fortress deep within the heart of the city. It was rumored to be impregnable, guarded by the most elite soldiers the Empire had to offer. But Riker was no stranger to impossible odds. The exosuit he wore was state-of-the-art, a marvel of technology designed to protect him from all harm. It had a built-in cloaking device, advanced combat capabilities, and a neural interface that allowed him to control it with nothing more than thought. As he moved through the city, the suit allowed him to blend in seamlessly with his surroundings, his movements fluid and invisible to the naked eye. He was a ghost, slipping past the rebel patrols without leaving a trace. He was close now. The rebel stronghold was within reach, and the princess's cell was only a few blocks away. As he crouched behind a building, watching the movements of the guards, Riker's thoughts wandered for a moment. He had always believed in the power of diplomacy, of conversation over conflict, but the war had taught him otherwise. Diplomacy had failed, and now all he had left were his skills as a soldier who had killed countless enemies in the name of survival. But this mission, he thought, could be different. If he could bring the princess back, if he could convince her that peace was possible, maybe, just maybe, there was hope for a future without war. A future where he could go back to the life he had once dreamed of. But that was a distant hope, something he dared not cling to. Hope had a way of fading quickly in the midst of battle. He shook off the thoughts and focused on the task at hand. The guards ahead were distracted, their attention elsewhere. Riker moved swiftly, his footsteps silent as he approached the prison's walls. He'd need to get in undetected, and that meant using every tool at his disposal. The suit's cloaking device flickered to life, and he was invisible to all but the most sophisticated sensors. With a steady hand, Riker activated the suit's grappling system, launching a thin cable up to a ledge high above. He climbed silently, careful not to alert the guards below. Once at the top, he dropped down into the prison courtyard where the princess was being held. The princess's cell was at the far end of the courtyard, its entrance guarded by 2 heavily armed soldiers. Riker's heart pounded in his chest, but he knew what he had to do. He took a deep breath and stepped out of the shadows. The first soldier barely had time to react before Riker was upon him. With a swift, precise strike, he disabled the guard, knocking him unconscious. The second soldier spun around, but Riker was faster. A quick jab to the throat incapacitated him, and he was down in seconds. Riker stood over the 2 fallen guards, his breath steady, his movements precise. He hadn't killed them. He couldn't bring himself to take another life, but he had done what was necessary to complete the mission. He approached the cell, his mind focused. The door opened with a quiet hiss, revealing the princess inside. She was sitting on a cot, her head bowed, her hands bound in shackles. She looked up as the door opened, and her eyes met Riker's for the first time. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Riker stood there, unsure of what to say. He had come to rescue her, to bring her back to the Alliance. But now that he was face to face with her, he felt a strange pull. She was not what he had expected. There was no fear in her eyes, no sense of helplessness. Instead, there was defiance. Strength. "I'm here to rescue you," Riker said, his voice steady but with a hint of uncertainty. The princess didn't say anything at first. She simply regarded him with a cool gaze, as if measuring him. "Rescue me?" she asked, her voice quiet but firm. "Why?" "So you can take me back to your war? So you can use me as a pawn in your endless game?" Riker was taken aback by her words. He had expected her to be grateful, to be scared. But she was neither. She was calm, composed, and questioning. "Not a pawn," Riker said. "I'm here because we can end this war. If we get you back to the Alliance, we can negotiate. We can find a way to stop the fighting." The princess studied him for a moment longer, then nodded. "If you can get me out of here alive, I'll listen to you. But know this, I'm no pawn." Riker wasn't sure what to make of her words, but he nodded nonetheless. There was no time for questions, no time for doubts. He had a mission to complete, and the princess's life depended on him. As he moved to release her from her restraints, Riker couldn't help but feel that the real challenge was just beginning. The princess wasn't just a captive. She was a player in a much larger game, one that Riker was only beginning to understand. And as he stood there, unmasking the truth of his mission, he realized that this journey would reveal more than just the secrets of the Zaran Empire. It would uncover the truth about himself as well, and that truth, he feared, might change everything. Riker's heart raced as he released the princess from her restraints. She rubbed her wrists, the cold steel still biting at her skin, but her expression remained stoic. She had not asked for a rescue, nor had she shown any sign of fear when faced with the looming presence of the human soldier. Instead, she looked at him with a steady gaze, as if she were sizing him up. The princess was no mere damsel in distress. She was an enigma, someone who seemed to carry the weight of a galaxy on her shoulders. Riker didn't know what to make of her. She was not what he had imagined when he accepted the mission. Most people in her position would be terrified, or at least desperate, but not her. Alia Zaran had been raised to rule, and it showed in the calmness of her demeanor. She was a princess, but more than that, she was a survivor. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice soft but firm. She didn't seem surprised by the question, as if she had expected it. Riker hesitated, looking over his shoulder at the dark corridors of the rebel stronghold. He had no intention of taking her back to the Alliance just yet. His mission was to get her out safely. But the war had become far more complicated than he had anticipated. He wasn't sure where to go next. He could hear the distant sounds of boots on the metal floors, the occasional shout from a passing guard. The rebels were beginning to notice their absence.
"We'll be safe soon."
"I just need to get you out of here," Riker replied, his voice low and careful. He turned to leave, but the princess didn't follow immediately. She was still standing, her gaze fixed on him. "Safe," she echoed, raising an eyebrow. "From whom? Your people? The rebels? Or the war that's been tearing everything apart?"
Riker's heart tightened at her words.
She wasn't wrong. The war had ravaged entire worlds, broken alliances, and shattered the hopes of countless beings. Humanity had fought for survival, but it had cost them their innocence. And now, here he was, a soldier trying to bring an end to it, yet unable to shake the feeling that he had become just as much a part of the problem as the ones he fought against. "I'm not here to fight anyone," he said, trying to sound more certain than he felt. "I'm here to save you." "And then what?" The princess's question was blunt, the raw honesty in her voice catching him off guard. "Take me back to the Alliance. Have me help end the war, only for you to use me as leverage to take over my people?" Riker took a deep breath. Her mistrust was understandable, but it still stung. He had always believed in the greater good, that his actions were justified for the sake of peace, but lately his certainty had begun to crumble. He hadn't thought about the deeper consequences of his actions. Saving her, bringing her back to the Alliance, could mean the end of her people's sovereignty. Could he really ask her to play a part in that? The princess was waiting for him to answer, her eyes unwavering. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't even angry, but she was calculating, as if trying to decide whether or not she could trust him. "I don't know," Riker finally admitted, his voice soft. "I don't know what comes next, but I know this. I didn't come here to deceive you. I came to give you a chance at survival, and if I can, I'll help you find a way to end this war without further bloodshed." She seemed to consider his words for a moment. The tension in the air was palpable, and Riker could sense that her decision, whatever it would be, would determine the course of their journey. He didn't know what she would say. He didn't know what he would do if she chose not to trust him. But in that moment, he knew one thing. He could no longer live with the lies he had been telling himself. The princess took a step forward. Her voice was quiet, but firm.
"I'll go with you, but only because you haven't given me a reason to doubt you."
Yet, the words were simple, but they carried a weight that Riker wasn't prepared for. They weren't just about her trust in him. They were about the trust he had in himself, in his purpose. The journey they were about to embark on wasn't just about getting her to safety. It was about finding a way to redeem the choices he had made, the path he had walked. They moved quickly through the rebel stronghold, their footsteps light but hurried. Riker led the way, keeping an eye on the corridors and any potential threats. The princess followed closely behind, her posture proud and confident. She was not just a captive anymore. She was a force in her own right. As they rounded a corner, they encountered another rebel patrol. Riker's instincts kicked in, and in a split second he made the decision to avoid confrontation. He pulled the princess into a nearby alcove, his hand firmly gripping her wrist to keep her from making a sound. They stood there, motionless, as the rebels passed by, unaware of their presence. It was a tense moment, but Riker's training had kicked in, and they remained hidden in the shadows until the danger passed. Once the coast was clear, they continued onward, taking more detours to avoid detection. The deeper they went into the stronghold, the more Riker realized that their escape wasn't going to be as easy as he had thought. The rebel forces had fortified the entire area, and they were well aware of the princess's escape. Every turn they took brought them closer to danger. As they approached the outer walls of the facility, the princess spoke again, her voice laced with curiosity.
"Why are you so determined to save me? What do you really want, Captain Riker?" The question caught him off guard, and for a moment he didn't know how to answer.
He had never really thought about it. The mission had always been clear: rescue the princess, end the war. But what did he truly want beyond that? Was it redemption for the countless lives lost in battle? Was it the hope of a future where peace could reign once again? Or was it something deeper, something more personal, that he wasn't ready to face? "I'm not sure," Riker admitted, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "Maybe I've spent too long fighting wars I don't fully understand. Maybe this is my chance to do something right." She didn't reply right away, but he could feel her eyes on him as they continued to move through the shadows. For the first time since the war began, Riker wasn't sure of his path. He had always been a soldier, defined by his actions on the battlefield. But now, with the princess beside him, he was beginning to wonder if there was another way. A way that didn't involve destruction. The princess glanced back at him, a small, knowing smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "I'm beginning to think you're not just a soldier, Damon Riker. You're something else entirely." He wasn't sure what she meant by her words, but something about them felt significant. He had spent so long hiding behind the armor, behind the identity of a soldier, that he had forgotten who he truly was underneath it all. The truth was, he didn't know if he could continue to fight for a cause that had become so corrupted. But, with Alia by his side, maybe there was still hope. They reached the outer perimeter of the stronghold just as a transport ship arrived, a rebel vehicle carrying reinforcements. Riker motioned for the princess to stay back. The vehicle was a threat, but he was ready for it. He grabbed a small device from his suit and activated it. A pulse of energy shot out, disabling the vehicle's power grid. The transport came to a halt, the lights flickering out. "We need to go," Riker said, pulling the princess toward the exit. They had no time to waste. As they made their way to the ship that would take them to safety, Riker couldn't shake the feeling that their journey had just begun. The war wasn't over. In fact, it was far from it. But for the first time in a long time, he felt like there was a chance for something greater than just survival. He didn't know where this path would lead, but with the princess at his side, he was determined to find out. The escape from the rebel stronghold was only the beginning of what would become a long, uncertain journey. Riker and Princess Alia found themselves aboard a small, stolen transport ship, heading into the vast unknown. The ship's hull groaned under the strain of the hasty departure, its engines humming as they cut through the darkness of space. Outside the viewport, the stars were little more than distant pinpricks of light, offering no comfort in the cold expanse of the galaxy. Riker sat at the controls, his eyes scanning the display as the ship slowly picked up speed. Alia stood behind him, her posture still proud, but now laced with an edge of caution. She hadn't spoken much since they left the stronghold, and Riker could feel the tension in the air between them. She had trusted him enough to follow him, but how much of that trust was real? How much of it was simply a result of the dire situation they found themselves in? "You don't talk much," Riker said, trying to break the silence. His voice was low but steady. "I thought the princesses of your empire were known for their words." Alia looked at him, her expression unreadable.
"Words are often a tool used to manipulate," she replied, her voice quiet. "But sometimes silence is more powerful."
"I've learned to listen, not just speak. Perhaps it's something you should try." Riker raised an eyebrow at her remark. There was something about the way she spoke, something that suggested she had lived through things far beyond what her title implied. Alia wasn't just a princess. She was a survivor, shaped by the harsh realities of the world she came from. He had seen that in the way she carried herself, in the calmness with which she had faced their escape.
"I'm not here to manipulate you, princess," Riker said after a moment.
"I'm here because I believe there's still a chance for peace, for both our people." Alia studied him for a long time, her eyes intense. "Peace? You don't even understand what you're asking for," she said softly. "My people have been at war for generations."
"You think you can just waltz in and fix everything?"
Riker's grip tightened on the controls. He could hear the bitterness in her voice, but it wasn't directed at him. It was something deeper, something born from years of conflict. from living in a galaxy where peace was an illusion. He understood that. He had seen it in the eyes of soldiers and the faces of civilians caught in the crossfire. Everyone was tired of the war, but no one seemed to know how to stop it. "I'm not saying it's going to be easy," Riker replied, his voice calm. "But we have to try. We can't just keep fighting forever." Alia turned away from him, her gaze drifting out the viewport.
You can try all you want, Captain.
But that doesn't change the truth. The war has become who we are. It's all we know, and in the end, it's all that matters. Riker could feel the weight of her words, but he refused to let them settle into him. He had seen too many people lose hope to let Alia's words define their journey. There had to be another way. There had to be a way to end this madness without further destruction.
You don't have to carry the weight of your people's history on your shoulders, Riker said, his voice firm. You have the chance to change things.
You don't have to follow the same path as those before you. Alia's laugh was soft, almost sad. You really believe that, don't you? That one person can change everything?
I do,
Riker replied, his eyes meeting hers. One person can change the course of history. And maybe that person is you. For a moment, Alia was silent. Her expression softened, just slightly, and Riker felt as if he had broken through something. Something small, but important. She wasn't fully convinced yet, but he could see the uncertainty in her eyes. She was beginning to question, to wonder if there was more to her destiny than just being a pawn in a war that had no end. The ship jolted suddenly, throwing Riker and Alia off balance. The ship's warning lights flashed, and the alarms began to blare. Riker quickly assessed the situation. Their escape had been too easy. There had to be a pursuit.
Hold!
Riker shouted, his hands flying over the controls as the ship's engines roared to life. He pulled the ship into a sharp turn, narrowly avoiding a collision with a nearby asteroid. He could see the blip of enemy ships closing in on them, their engines glowing bright in the dark expanse of space.
They found us,
Alia said, her voice steady despite the panic creeping into her chest.
What do we do now?
We fight, Riker said, his jaw tightening. He had no choice. They couldn't outrun the enemy. The only option was to stand and fight. Riker opened fire on the incoming ships, the ship's weapons system engaging with a burst of energy. The enemy ships returned fire, their lasers cutting through the darkness and striking the shields of the transport. The ship shuddered with each impact, but the shields held, for now.
Brace for impact!
Riker yelled as another round of enemy fire hit their ship. The transport rocked violently, and Alia stumbled, grabbing onto the nearest console for support. Riker's grip on the controls tightened as he maneuvered the ship into a series of evasive maneuvers. He could feel the sweat on his forehead, the pressure of the situation weighing heavily on him.
Are you trying to kill us?
Alia shouted, her voice rising above the roar of the ship's engines. Riker didn't respond. He couldn't afford to waste time on anything other than getting them out of this mess. The enemy ships were closing in fast, their weapons relentless. He had to shake them off before they were overwhelmed.
Hang on!
Riker shouted as he performed a dangerous dive, sending the ship plunging toward an asteroid field. The enemy ships followed, but they weren't as agile as his transport. Riker gritted his teeth, focusing on the path ahead. The asteroids were coming at them fast, and he had to navigate them perfectly or risk being torn apart. Alia's breath caught in her throat as they plunged deeper into the asteroid field. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. Riker's skill at piloting the ship was unmatched. He was weaving in and out of the massive rocks with ease, taking risks that seemed impossible. But despite his expertise, the enemy ships were still on their tail, refusing to back off. A sharp jolt threw Alia to the side, and she barely managed to keep her footing as the ship banked sharply to the left. She was starting to feel the strain of the chase, her nerves fraying with every near miss. The ship was starting to take damage, the hull creaking with each blast. It wouldn't last much longer at this rate.
We need to get out of here, Alia said, her voice urgent. They're going to catch us. We won't survive another hit like that. Riker's eyes were narrowed in concentration.
He knew she was right. They couldn't keep this up much longer. He had one shot to escape, and it had to work. With a sharp turn, he pointed the ship directly at a large asteroid, its surface pocked with craters and jagged edges. Alia gasped, her hands gripping the armrests of her seat.
What are you doing? Trust me,
Riker muttered, his voice calm as he slammed the ship into full speed. They were going to use the asteroid as cover, but it would be close, too close. The ship's engines roared as they hurtled toward the massive rock, the enemy ships hot on their trail. At the last possible second, Riker pulled the ship into a steep climb, narrowly avoiding the asteroid's jagged surface. The enemy ships, too focused on their pursuit, didn't make the turn in time. Two of them collided with the asteroid, their ships exploding in a brilliant flash of light. The remaining enemy ship tried to evade, but it was too late. Riker fired the ship's weapons, hitting it with a barrage of energy blasts that crippled its engines. The ship went dark, floating aimlessly in space. Riker took a deep breath, his hands shaking as he eased the transport into a steady orbit around the asteroid. They had made it. They had escaped. Alia let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her hands were still gripping the seat, but the panic that had consumed her moments ago had faded. She looked at Riker, her expression softening for the first time since their escape began. "You did it," she said, her voice quieter now, but filled with respect. "You actually did it." Riker nodded, his eyes focused on the stars ahead. "It's not over yet. We still got a long way to go." But for the first time, he felt like they might just have a chance. Together, they could survive this war. Together, they could change the course of history. And maybe, just maybe, they could find the peace that had eluded them all along. The escape had been risky, but they were alive. That was all that mattered now. Riker piloted the ship through the endless expanse of space, keeping one eye on the damaged transport systems, while the other remained on the stars ahead. They had outrun the rebel pursuit, but they hadn't won the war, not yet. Alia sat quietly behind him, her gaze fixed on the viewport. The stars outside were distant, cold, and vast, just like the emptiness she felt inside. Everything she had known, her empire, her duty, her family, had been shattered in the blink of an eye. And now, she was sitting in a stolen ship with a human soldier who had claimed to want peace. She still didn't know if she could trust him, but she couldn't deny that he had kept his word so far. The silence between them had become comfortable in its own way. The tension that had once filled every moment now replaced by something uncertain, something fragile.
How long until we reach the neutral zone? Alia asked, her voice soft.
It was the first time she had spoken since their escape from the asteroid field. "Another few hours," Riker replied, his voice calm but focused. "We'll be safe there. We just need to lay low and wait for things to cool off."
Alia nodded, but she wasn't sure if she believed him. The war was far from over, and there were still enemies who would stop at nothing to get her back.
But the longer she stayed with Riker, the more she realized that there was something different about him. He wasn't like the others, like the soldiers who had fought against her people, like the diplomats who had only used her as a pawn in their games. There was a quiet honesty in him that she couldn't ignore, even if she didn't fully understand it yet. She had always been a ruler, a figurehead, for a people who had known nothing but war. But now, for the first time, she was faced with a choice that wasn't about politics or power. It was about survival, about the possibility of something more. Could she trust this man who claimed to want peace? Or was he just another player in a game she couldn't control? Alia stood and moved to the back of the ship, trying to shake off the thoughts that were crowding her mind. She wasn't sure if she was ready to confront them yet. She needed space, time to think, time to figure out what her next move would be. As she walked past the small cargo hold, something caught her eye. A faint noise like a low hum echoed from the far side of the ship. Curious, she approached, her footsteps light on the metal floor. To her surprise, Riker was there, crouched down beside a small compartment, his hands working swiftly to repair something. "What's that?" Alia asked, peering over his shoulder. Riker glanced up, his eyes meeting hers. "It's a backup engine part," he said, his tone casual. "I've been meaning to fix it for a while. Can't rely on the main engine forever." Alia didn't understand much about ships, but she could see the skill with which Riker worked. His hands were steady, moving with precision as he tweaked the wires and components. "You're good at that," she said, a small smile tugging at her lips. Riker chuckled, though there was no humor in it. "I have had to learn a lot of things since the war started. Survival skills, mostly. But I'm not the only one who's good at keeping things together." Alia raised an eyebrow, unsure of what he meant. "What do you mean?" He stood up, wiping his hands on a cloth. "I've seen people break, seen them lose everything. It's not just soldiers who are tested. Everyone is tested by war, even the ones who don't fight." Alia felt a strange tug in her chest at his words. She knew what he meant. She had seen her people torn apart, their spirits crushed by the constant battles and the unyielding weight of their history. She had always believed that strength came from power, from control. But now, in this moment, she was beginning to wonder if strength meant something different. "Sometimes it feels like we're just waiting for the end," Alia said quietly. "Like everything is too far gone to fix." Riker's eyes softened as he looked at her. "It's not too late," he said, his voice steady. "You don't have to be a ruler, Alia. You don't have to carry the weight of your people's history alone. You can choose a different path, a path that leads to something better." She looked at him for a long time, considering his words. Could she really choose a different path? Could she abandon everything she had been taught, everything she had believed, and try to build something new? The thought terrified her, but it also stirred something deep within her, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. "Maybe," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe there is a way." Riker nodded, a faint smile playing on his lips. "I don't have all the answers, but I'm here to help you find them. And I'm not going anywhere." The ship jolted again, a sudden shift that sent both of them off balance. Alia grabbed the nearest support bar, steadying herself, while Riker quickly moved to the controls, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. "What happened?" Alia asked, her voice rising in alarm. "We've got company," Riker replied, his tone sharp. "And it's not just a random patrol." Alia's heart skipped a beat.
Who is it? Riker didn't answer immediately, his eyes scanning the ship's systems. The faint hum of an incoming signal grew louder, the warning lights flashing as a message appeared on the display.
"They found us," he said, his voice tense. "The Zaran Empire. They've tracked us down." Alia's blood ran cold at the mention of her empire. She knew that her capture would have been noticed, but she hadn't expected them to catch up with her so soon.
"What do we do?" she asked, her voice tight with fear. "We fight," Riker said, his expression hardening.
We don't have a choice now.
The enemy ship's weapons came online, a barrage of laser fire striking the transport before Riker could even react. The shields held for a moment, but they were weakening fast. Alia could feel the ship's systems straining, the vibrations running through the hull. The enemy was closing in, their weapons primed and ready to deliver a deadly blow. Riker gritted his teeth as he maneuvered the ship, weaving through the incoming fire.
Hold on!
He shouted. This is going to be rough. Alia's grip on the bar tightened as the ship jerked violently. She could feel her pulse racing, her breath coming faster with every near miss. She had never been in a real battle before. She had never seen what war truly looked like, Until now. But in that moment, she realized something. She wasn't just a princess anymore. She was part of this fight, whether she liked it or not. She turned to Riker, her eyes meeting his.
What do we need to do?
Riker's gaze was fierce, his jaw set in determination. We need to get to the weapons bay. I'll need your help to fire back.
Alia didn't hesitate.
She nodded, her mind clearing. She wasn't going to sit idly by while her people chased her down. She wasn't going to let herself be a victim anymore. She had a choice to make, and she chose to fight. Together, they moved quickly through the ship, their footsteps heavy with purpose. The sound of laser fire outside grew louder, but Riker led the way, his movements swift and confident. They reached the weapons bay, where Riker began activating the ship's defense systems. Alia helped, her fingers flying over the controls as she set the targeting system.
We'll need to make every shot count, Riker said, his voice steady despite the chaos outside. We don't have a lot of ammo left.
I understand, Alia replied, her voice sharp with resolve. I'm ready. The ship shuddered as another round of laser fire hit, the impact rattling the hull.
Riker opened fire, the ship's weapons system sending a blast of energy toward the enemy vessel. The first shot missed, but the second hit its target. A large explosion erupted from the enemy ship, sending it into a tailspin.
We're not out of danger yet, Riker said, his eyes focused on the display.
But we've got a chance! Alia watched as the enemy ship began to break apart, its hull cracking under the pressure of their attack. For the first time in a long while, she felt a flicker of hope. She wasn't alone in this fight. She had someone by her side. Someone who believed in her. And together, they could make a difference. The enemy ship was defeated, drifting lifelessly in space, and the transport continued its journey into the unknown. The stars stretched out before them, endless and beautiful. And for the first time, Alia allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was a future beyond the war. A future where peace was possible. A future where she could stand by Riker, not as a princess or a soldier, but as a person. Someone who had chosen to fight for something greater than herself. And with that thought in her mind, Alia knew that they weren't just surviving anymore. They were building something new. And this time, they would fight for each other.